Allahu Akbar.
Vladimir Putin has declared Russia's intervention in Syria as a fight against the terrorists of the Islamic State.
Мы, разумеется, не собираемся погружаться в этот конфликт, что называется, с головой.
In 2011, Putin had stepped down as president, but he continues to serve as prime minister under his protege, Dmitry Medvedev. Protests are sweeping the Arab world.
The United States also strongly supports the universal rights of the Libyan people.
Medvedev voices his sympathy and does not block American and NATO intervention in Libya. Putin, though, lashes out.
Вообще это мне, знаете, напоминает средневековый призыв к крестовому походу, когда кто-то призывал кого-то идти в определенное место и чего-то освобождать.
The public breach between the two leaders contributes to Putin's decision to return to the presidency later that year. In 2013, protests erupt yet again in Ukraine, this time over efforts to move the country closer to the European Union.
Обязательство органов власти наводить порядок, потому что иначе такое развитие событий может привести к хаосу.
Chaos is exactly what Putin believes has emerged whenever governments have been toppled or threatened. That is the case with Syria, Russia's closest ally in the Middle East. Bashar al-Assad is the state, and if the West won't protect him from the unruly mobs, then Putin will.
Limited and tailored use of US forces, says the draft resolution, with no ground troops. And Syria's regime continues to prepare itself for cruise missile strikes. The US Secretary of State told a skeptical congressional committee evidence that Assad used chemical weapons was solid.
We have physical evidence of where the rockets came from and when. Not one rocket landed in regime-controlled territory. Not one.
They agreed to put the draft resolution to a vote next week, and Russian President Vladimir Putin was fast to react.
In line with international law, only the UN Security Council could sanction the use of force against a sovereign state. Any other pretext or method which might be used to justify the use of force against an independent sovereign state is inadmissible and can only be interpreted as an aggression.
And that begs the question, what sort of response can there be from Syria's allies if there are strikes? This unverified video shows a Syrian missile launcher reported to be maneuvering at Al-Mazar air base in Damascus. The first Syrian verbal response to the US resolution came from its UN ambassador.
How could the United States of America act, unilaterally speaking, from outside the context of the United Nations? Who asked Mr. Obama to be the bully of the world?
This is not Iraq, and this is not Afghanistan.
But the US president appears resolute in his messaging. If, as is likely, the resolution is approved, he'll have the backing from Congress for a 60-day time period. US Navy maneuvers continue, with the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz last reported in the Red Sea. While in Syria, for the people at least, there is the looming question: will a limited action by the US make any difference, or could it make the situation even worse?
I have no doubt that the combination of the threat of force and the willingness to pursue diplomacy helped to bring us to this moment. But diplomacy requires willing partners. And I want to thank President Putin for his willingness to pick up on the possibility of negotiating an end to Syrian weapons of mass destruction.
The Japanese government plans to cooperate in efforts to remove Syria's chemical weapons. Russia and the United States agreed last week on a framework for Syria to surrender its chemical weapons stockpile. The Syrian government has already submitted a report on its chemical weapons to an international watchdog. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe intends to make the announcement at the UN General Assembly next week. He's expected to say that Japan is ready to help put Syria's chemical weapons under international control, and also announce that Japan will provide $60 million in humanitarian aid for Syrian refugees. The government is considering providing millions of dollars in financial aid to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons based in The Hague. It also wants to send experts and equipment to help dispose of the chemical weapons.
Last month, Russia's Vladimir Putin had an op-ed, Putin in the op-ed New York Times, offering advice about Syria. You called it tough and amazingly well-written.
It was well-written.
Are you an admirer of the Russian?
I think he's done really a great job of outsmarting our country. When he gave the lifeline to President Obama, while it was a lifeline and good for Obama because it got him off the hook, because the last thing he should have done at that point was go in. It was the craziest thing. Can you imagine General Douglas MacArthur talking about war and saying, well, you know, we're going to think about it. Maybe we'll drop bombs in about a week and a half, and we're going to put...
Well, because the public opposed it.
What happened to the word surprise?
You know, the leadership.
Okay, and by the way, we should have never done it in the first place. Okay, I was against it from day one.
So if Putin,
you know what, we have enough problems in this country.
If Putin got Assad to back down, and now they're having inspections, we're all winners, aren't we?
No, but Putin ends up taking over because Assad now makes it. Assad, you know, 6 months ago had no chance, according to the great geniuses that you watch on television. He had no chance. His regime was going to fall. His regime now is 100%. Russia has now taken over Syria.
The leader of the militant group that's nearly divided Iraq made what might be his first ever taped appearance on Saturday. A video that surfaced today shows a man claiming to be Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi delivering a sermon at a mosque on Friday in Mosul, a city in northern Iraq. Baghdadi is notoriously elusive, and the authenticity of the video couldn't be verified. But the man in the video does look a lot like known pictures of the Islamist leader. The video is likely to widen Baghdadi's already massive appeal among Islamist militants. In his speech Friday, Baghdadi called on Muslims everywhere to pledge allegiance to him and to join his struggle against non-believers.
أمانة ثقيلة فوليت عليكم ولست بخيركم ولا أفضل منكم فإن رأيتموني على حق فأعينوني وإن رأيتموني على باطل فانصحوني وسددوني وأطيعوني ما أطعت الله فيكم.
Baghdadi's group, the Islamic State, has been growing in popularity among aspiring jihadis and jihadi financiers since he quickly beat back the Iraqi army last month and took over huge parts of the country. Baghdadi says he wants the Islamic State, which until recently was called the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, or ISIS, to be a caliphate, or Islamic nation. In his Friday sermon, Baghdadi dressed in all black like a caliph from the Abbasid period of Iraq.
Я тоже об этом сказал. Вот президент Обама упомянул об одной из угроз, это ИГИЛ. Ну а кто помогал вооружать людей, которые в Сирии боролись с Асадом-то? Кто создавал благоприятный политический информационный климат? Кто подталкивал к поставкам оружия? А вы чего, разве вы не понимаете, кто там воюет? Там воюют наемники. В основном. Вы знаете, что там платят деньги? И они воюют там, где платят больше. Вот они вооружились, им платят определенную сумму. Мне даже называли эти суммы, которые им платят. Они там воюют уже с оружием, все, у них уже не отнимешь. Потом выяснилось, что в другом месте чуть-чуть начали побольше платить. Они там туда перетекут. Вот они захватили месторождения нефтяные, там, скажем, где-то в Ираке или в Сирии. Нефть начали добывать. У них эту нефть покупают, транспортируют, продают. Почему санкции не накладывают на всех, кто это делает? А что, разве Соединенные Штаты не знают, кто это делает? Это разве не их союзники этим занимаются? У них что, нет силы, возможности повлиять на своих союзников? Или они не хотят влиять? Зачем они бомбят ИГИЛ? Вот там начали нефть добывать и больше платить. И там часть сразу этих боевиков перетекла из так называемой цивилизованной оппозиции. Сразу же перетекла в ИГИЛ, потому что там больше платят. Я считаю, что это абсолютно невыверенная, непрофессиональная политика, без опоры на реалии. Надо поддержать цивилизованную демократическую оппозицию в Сирии.
We begin with Japan's reaction to the execution of one of its nationals by the extremist group Islamic State. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has called the murder outrageous and has once again demanded the group release Kenji Goto, a second Japanese man they're holding. Abe confirmed to Japanese broadcaster NHK that the video released over the weekend that shows the decapitated body of Haruna Yukawa was authentic. The Japanese leader said saving Kenji Goto's life was now Tokyo's top priority, but he stressed that Japan would not give in to terrorism. In the latest recording, Goto reads a statement saying Islamic State were now demanding the release of a prisoner held in Jordan instead of their previous ransom demand.
Japan's Prime Minister has condemned the release of a video by Islamic State militants appearing to show the beheading of Japanese journalist Kenji Goto. The video was posted on militant websites ending days of negotiations to save Goto. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said Japan would not give in to terrorism and that he would expand support to countries fighting IS.
When I think of the grief of his family, I am left without words. The Japanese government has been doing its utmost in responding to Winner's release, and we are filled with deep regrets. I feel indignation over this immoral and heinous act of terrorism. I will never forgive these terrorists. I shall let them pay for this sin and will coordinate with the international community for it.
Islamic State have cited Japanese aid as a reason for the hostage-taking. This video comes less than a week after the apparent beheading of another Japanese man, Haruna Yukawa. Goto was captured after he travelled to Syria in October to try and win Yukawa's release. The video could not be immediately independently verified, but conformed to other beheading videos released by the extremists who now control about a third of both Syria and neighbouring Iraq in a self-declared caliphate.
卑劣なテロリズムが世界へ蔓延しつつあります。テロリストたちに世界のどこにも安住の地を与えてはなりません。感染症や自然災害の前で国境など意味を持ちません。侵略または侵略の脅威、武力行使によって他国の領土保全や政治的独立を侵さない。国際紛争は平和的手段によって解決する。共に立ち向かう。私たちは今また世界に向かって強い結束を示さなければなりません。
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемый господин генеральный секретарь, уважаемые главы государств и правительств, дамы и господа. 70-летний юбилей Организации Объединенных Наций – хороший повод обратиться и к истории, и поговорить о нашем общем будущем.
President Putin's speech to the UN General Assembly, which we introduced in our last issue, was part of a speech given just before Russia decided to intervene militarily in Syria at the request of President Assad. The meeting between Prime Minister Abe and President Putin in New York took place on the same day, before this speech, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, quoting from the Kremlin transcript. Mr. Prime Minister, allow me to greet you. I'd like to begin the meeting by noting that we are seeing some activation in our contacts in various areas. Recently, for the first time in several years, we held a meeting of the Intergovernmental Commission. There are contacts between our Security Council secretaries, and your foreign minister has visited Moscow, but unfortunately, our trade has declined significantly. Although I'm certain that there are good prospects, and our many joint projects are the best proof of this. This was the person who gave the interview to CNN on the same day.
Vladimir Putin today was at the UN, so is Barack Obama. They could not be more different when it comes to Syria. Barack Obama saying he wants Bashar al-Assad removed from power. Putin says he thinks that's an enormous mistake not to cooperate with Vladimir Putin. Which man is right?
Okay, so I've been saying this for a long time, and I've kept it low, and I really understand what's going on in Syria because you look at it, first of all, it's a total catastrophe, it's a total mess. and we're helping to make it a mess. Now, we have ISIS, and ISIS wants to go after Assad, but we're knocking the hell out of them, even though it's not a very full-blown thing. We're still dropping bombs all over the place, and, you know, look, they're not exactly loving life over in Syria. So we're stopping them to a certain extent from going after Assad. You have Russia that's now there. Russia's on the side of Assad, and Russia wants to get rid of ISIS as much as we do, if not more, because they don't want them coming into Russia. And I'm saying, why are we knocking ISIS, and yet at the same time we're against Assad? Let them fight, take over the remnants. But more importantly, let Russia fight ISIS if they want to fight them. Let them fight them in Syria. Now, we can fight them in Iraq. But if you think about Iraq, we've spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives lost, wounded warriors who we love and I love all over the place.
Then, 2 days later, on September 30th, 2015, Russia announced its intention to intervene militarily in Syria.
Исламского государства.
Террористы могут взорвать мечети,
И удары были нанесены по
площадка и полевой лагерь террористов.
In Syria, we have seen a troubling escalation of Russian military activities. We will assess the latest developments and their implications for the security of the alliance. This is particularly relevant in the view of the recent violations of NATO's airspace by Russian aircraft.
President Putin used this interview to clarify his position on Syria. He says Russian airstrikes are targeting Islamic State militants and other extremists and bolstering Bashar al-Assad in power as the country's only legitimate force. It's only when the situation is stabilised, he believes, that some kind of peace deal can be negotiated. So he scoffed at American efforts to arm moderate opposition groups as $500 million wasted. Mr. Putin insisted that Russia was a peace-loving nation, but he was in typical forceful form.
Дело не во внешней политике.
Russian foreign policy is truly peaceful, without any exaggeration. If you take a look at the political world map and see what Russia is, it becomes evident that we don't need either foreign territories or natural resources. We've got everything in abundance. We're a self-sufficient country. We have no need to be at war or in conflict with anyone. We have no intention of creating an empire or reconstructing the Soviet Union, yet we must defend our independence and sovereignty. We've done it before, and we are going to do it in future.
He
said the barrage of brand new cruise missiles fired at Syria last week showed the world what high-tech modern weapons Russia has and that it's ready to use them to protect its interests.
When I made decisions on active operations against international terrorist groups after the attack on Dagestan, many people said to me, nothing should be done because there is a danger that the terrorists would attack in response. So it became my conviction that if one is afraid, the extremist groups will surely do something nasty. One should take preventative measures. Danger does exist, but without active steps, danger in Syria will exist anyway.
What part of this interview is typical forceful will depend on the recipient. However, in the case of news reporting, much of it is cut and paste reporting, and impressions can also be manipulated by the reporter's words and the simultaneous interpreter's choice of words.
Дело не во внешней политике. Внешняя политика России миролюбивая, без всякого преувеличения. Если посмотреть на политическую карту мира и увидеть, что из себя представляет Россия, становится очевидным, что нам не нужно ни чужие территории, ни чужие природные богатства какие-то. У нас всего достаточно. Мы самодостаточная страна. У нас нет необходимости с кем-то воевать и конфликтовать. Конечно, опасность такая существует, но она и без активных действий в Сирии, хочу вот подчеркнуть, она и так существовала. И если бы мы позволили, извините за моветон, схомячить эту Сирию, то вот эти тысячи людей, которые там сейчас бегают с автоматами Калашникова, они оказались бы на нашей территории. А так мы, во всяком случае, на дальних подступах поможем президенту Асаду с ними бороться.
But you also recently said that the Middle East would be better off with Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and Assad in power. How does...
I didn't say Assad, but we certainly have not gained anything with Gaddafi. And you look at what happened. I mean, look at Libya. Look at Iraq. Iraq used to be no terrorists. He would kill the terrorists immediately. It was like, now it's the Harvard of terrorism. Iraq. If you look at Iraq from years ago, I'm not saying he was a nice guy, he was a horrible guy, but it was a lot better than it is right now. Right now, Iraq is a training ground for terrorists. Right now, Libya, nobody even knows Libya. Frankly, there is no Iraq and there is no Libya. It's all broken up. They have no control. Nobody knows what's going on.
The world would be better off with Saddam Hussein
100%.
and Gaddafi in power?
100%. Now, as far as Assad is concerned.
What about the human rights abuses?
Let's talk about, well, you don't think they're happening now? They're worse now than they ever were. People are getting their heads chopped off. They're being drowned. Right now, they're far worse than they were ever under Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. I mean, look what happened. Libya's a catastrophe. You look at our ambassador as an example, okay? Libya is a disaster. Iraq is a disaster. Syria is a disaster. The whole Middle East. And it all blew up around Hillary Clinton and around Barack Obama. It all blew up. Now, one thing about Assad, not a good guy. I understand that. But we're backing and spending billions and billions of dollars on backing rebels that we have no idea who they are. And a lot of people think they're ISIS. I happen to think they're ISIS, but who knows? But we're spending billions of dollars to get Assad out with people that we have no idea who they are. I don't think that's smart. We have to rebuild our country. Our country's falling to pieces. We have 19 trillion in debt. We have infrastructure that's a disaster. Our roadways, our airports, our schools, everything. We have to start thinking about ourselves. We're pouring trillions of dollars into the Middle East, and we have nothing for it. We have nothing.
In the Syrian town of Tartus, they've taken to the streets to praise the president. Russia's president. Vladimir Putin is being hailed as a hero for supporting President Assad. At times, it doesn't look the most spontaneous outpouring of emotion. But the Russian Defense Ministry that brought us here as part of a tour assures us this rally wasn't organised for our cameras, and that these Syrians really do respect President Putin.
We are here to say thank you, Russia, thank you, Syria, thank you, Putin. We love you, Russia. I love you, Russia. I love you.
Support like this. For 6 weeks now, Russian bombers have been taking off round the clock from an airbase near Latakia. Their mission, airstrikes on what Moscow calls terrorist targets. From the air, Russia has been providing vital support for President Assad's ground troops. But not everyone in Syria welcomes the intervention. Russia has been accused of causing civilian casualties with its airstrikes. It denies that. Some jihadist groups have declared a holy war on Russia. But Moscow has friends here. This used to be the Latakia Sports Stadium. It's now a refugee camp for thousands of Syrians who fled the fighting. Many of the people we spoke to here said Russia has given them hope. Mohammed told me that Russia's military operation is helping his country. After 3 years here, he hopes to return home soon to Aleppo. So many have been killed in Syria, so many made homeless. After more than 4 years of war, people here just want their lives back. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Latakia, Syria.
In 2015, the Quad was not official, Australia did not participate in the joint exercise, India was reluctant to meet face-to-face, and the United States was worried about provoking China. The destabilization of the Middle East was a matter of life and death for Japan, which depended on it for more than 90% of its energy needs. In addition, China's military presence in the South China Sea threatens the sea lanes from the Middle East to Japan.
This is the Chinese Navy. This is the Chinese Navy. Please go away quickly.
As for Russia, during this period, it was not only Syria, but also NATO's eastward expansion, economic sanctions due to the annexation of Crimea after the Maidan Revolution, and the border dispute with Ukraine that continues to this day, which is another clear conflict structure with the Obama administration. Threats to Japan remain tense with China and North Korea, as well as with its neighbor South Korea, an ally but anti-Japanese nation. And it is in the national interest to negotiate a peace treaty with Russia, with whom dialogue is possible. Energy dependence on the Middle East has dropped to the 80% range due to improved relations with Russia. As you know, Japan is the only Western country whose neighbors are surrounded by nuclear powers. For Japan, I see no reason to make an enemy of Russia, which is not an anti-Japanese nation. What level of independent defense and nuclear capability will be possible in how many years if we start discussing it now? The relationship between Japan and Russia was an important move for the containment of China. Russian politicians have analyzed and evaluated this point more calmly than Japanese politicians. They said that Prime Minister Abe made the best use of Russia in a good way. Ukraine is the gateway to Europe for China's One Belt, One Road initiative. China's growing influence over Kazakhstan and Ukraine is not in Russia's interest. The military base in the South China Sea is a stepping stone to China's expansion into the Pacific. The Quad is an important framework. We will put our own national interests and security first, and work with those with whom we can engage in dialogue. It can be said that Prime Minister Abe's plan is a successful use of the West's containment of Russia. How do the Japanese media and politicians, who lump China, North Korea, and Russia together as dictatorships, intend to accomplish the return of the northern territories without a diplomatic window? Are we going to fight to get it back? If you think that once President Putin is ousted, you can negotiate, the exact opposite may happen. Because the anti-Putin faction within Russia is precisely that, a Grand Russianist.